Are you yearning to wake up each morning and ignite a new meaning and purpose in life and beyond? Welcome, everyone. I'm Michael McGinnis, an award-winning author, speaker, and educator on human potential, and your host on You Can Do It, Inspiring Growth, Igniting Potential. Life presents us with challenges that serve as catalysts for growth. The pivotal question is, how do we respond to these challenges, or better yet, opportunities? Do we adopt a victim mindset or rise to become victors? Our goal here is to guide and inspire you to master the most amazing journey you have, your life. You Can Do It starts now. Hey everybody, Michael McGinnis here with You Can Do It, right? We're now exploring, a real tough topic. But again, when it comes to the topic of becoming a full potential, confronting our mortality is critical. And I mentioned in the last podcast, my own experiences, right? I had that avid fear of death, which is very prevalent in society. And yet it happens to all of us. Life as a whole just degrades. Everything degrades. The body we have degrades over time. There's no stopping that. And that's the part that ultimately, we confront. And the discussion here is how to have a conversation about this. So not let this be this bad, ugly concept and topic that we avoid at all costs, but to embrace it. And in my conversation podcast last week, I shared my own experiences with that and the different volunteer experiences I had that began to start getting me more comfortable talking about this concept of death. And it has a huge and positive impact in terms of our psychology today. Imagine living a life, without this avid fear of death. And instead being able to embrace that rather than avoiding it. And as we talked about, we're a society that we really tend to avoid this topic. So today we're going to talk about more about death, having conversations about death, and some of the many great resources that we have. And and one of the topics that we're going to be talking about relates to the hospice care, right? Hospice care, what a great experience I had there in terms of being with those who are on their way out in life. And the concept is that, the benefit of being able to approach it is not only being able to better be there for them, which remember, we're going to be there someday as well. And we're going to want that same kind of human benefit of those around us being there rather than avoiding us, as well as being able to talk about it because these are topics we get when and as we get older and we start confronting our mortality, whether it's a disease, an accident, or just simply the aging process. So let's begin really with some of the resources. And an incredible resource that I'd like to share with you, and you could see here, is the resources from hospice care. In fact, what you'll see here is a document, right, that comes from St. Clair Hospice. And it's how to talk about death and dying. In fact, this is the actual opening of that document. And I want to refer to it because it does a better job than ever I could in terms of really crystallizing the kinds of things that are the benefit from having this conversation. It starts off, saying we should all feel empowered and confident to talk about death, ask questions, listen, and be sure of what we and our loved ones would like to happen when our time comes, right? And that's what used to happen. We talked about last time about how this was much more so, in vogue in terms of our comfort and deal with it. People wore black, like I'm doing today, sort of symbolize us being in mourning. And people would wear this for a year, stating that I'm in that process of grieving and mourning. And people used to stop and be able to talk to us and be able to comfort us and say how you were doing and be able to comfort us rather than this expectation we're supposed to just go deal with it all on our own, which is a tough thing to deal on your own. There's a lot of aspects to experiencing death that we often want to be able to talk about. However, it's not as easy as it says the conversation. Notice I'm just looking over to see the document, so bear with me as I'm looking away from my audience. It can be upsetting and uncomfortable for many of us, particularly again in our society, where we tend to avoid these topics at all costs. But it doesn't have to be that way. And we're doing it here. We're having a conversation about mortality, about death. Our aim is to support to people. approach and engage in those meaningful exchanges with friends and families, and to demystify the fear and anxiety around death. And that's what the collective of my experiences, as I shared in the first podcast on this topic, really did. It helped to try to demystify. It was real. It was something real, but rather than something keep at arm's length or just shut my eyes and ears to the topic, I began to learn more about it, and it had that benefit of demystifying it. The comprehensive guide on how to talk about death offers reassurance, support, and advice on having those important conversations with loved ones, right? And that's what we really want to do, right? And we want to think forward again of our own time. We're going to be there ourselves. And wouldn't we want the kinds of ability to be able to converse about what's going on in our life, the concerns, the thoughts, the ideas, the fears, the reflections? I'm going to be talking about that as related to a post I once did on the hospice experience. But I want to cover on this last point here. You see it surrounded in blue, and it says, we believe that when we are able to face death openly, and this is the key part, I'm really trying to emphasize here in terms of the benefit of this conversations about mortality, and approach it peacefully and positively as a natural part of life. It is. We're all going to experience. There's no escape of it. Every living thing has a life cycle. We will feel empowered to live our days in the fullest. This is the greatest benefit of this, is that as we come to this awareness, it can have that powerful effect as it has had with me and continues to have with me to remind me to get the most out of this life while we have it. Talking about death and dying is the first step towards that reality, planning for life and supporting ourselves and our loved ones. What a gift to give those around us is just to be able to be at their bedside fully and completely and holding their hands as we did in volunteer as in hospice care as volunteers, often because again, family members often had a difficult time because they just didn't want to deal with this topic. And unfortunately, it left that person all alone. And that's the greatest gift that hospice care provides is that they still have that human contact with it. I want to show this image here. This next image, I think, is a uh, great portrayal, right, of really the benefit of these conversations about death. I'm going to read this because it's well worth it for those who are listening to this via audio only. And it comes from Lesson Learned about life. Says, first, I was dying to finish high school and start college. And then I was dying to finish college and start working. And then I was dying to marry and have children. And then I was dying for my children to grow old enough for school so I could return to work. And then I was dying to retire. And now I'm dying. And suddenly I realize I forgot to live. That's the power. It's the power of confronting mortality and dealing with that aspect of life, that there's no avoidance with it. And instead, to be able to gain the lessons learned from this, the empowerment that it gives us to want to go forward, to want to achieve our full potential. Death, as the expression is of my podcast, is about inspiring growth. And confronting immortality does that and ignites our potential to want to get the most out of this life. Because, yes, one day we will be confronting that, and we don't know when that is. There's a second one that relates to this too, and I love this. It's a poem or saying or whatever you would call this over here too. And once again, I'm going to read this. I heard this many years ago, and it's something I really just keep in front of me at all times. And it goes, there was a very cautious man who never laughed or played. He never risked, he never tried, he never sang or prayed. And when one day he passed away, his insurance was denied. For since he never really lived, they claimed he never really died. Powerful, isn't it? When you stop to contemplate this, is that the American Indians had a really powerful element within their culture and society. And I've once had a chance to talk with the American Indians at a conference. And they talked about, what we would call today the deathbed perspective, and how they kept that in front of them whenever the chief and council made all of their decisions. They looked out 7 generations to understand the impact that it would have on the future generations of decisions they would make today. But they confronted this idea of mortality. It was an open and candid conversation. And I learned from one of them about how they utilize what they called the death, or what I would label it as the deathbed perspective, what they labeled it there, as a chance to be able to reflect back on challenges we're experiencing during in life. And they said that one of the best things you can do is when you're confronting this, what seemingly major challenge, and often they're major challenges, but look at it from the perspective of when you're on your deathbed and consider what would that problem or challenge we're experiencing now mean when we're at the end of our life? And chances are you'll come to the same conclusion I did. Is yes, it's important. Yes, it's something to deal with. But at that point, it's really not going to make a big difference. It's just another challenge I experienced in life. So why not get over it, get past it, and move on with living life, right? These powerful, profound concepts we had. The other part of this discussion here is just talk about the many resources that we have, right? And this is what we're just having a conversation. I'm having a conversation with you, and I'm just sharing some of the ideas and thoughts that really helped me and helped others with respect to getting more comfortable with this concept of death. This next image here you'll see comes from an amazing person, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Her research was profound and powerful, and often was based on her research that focused on those that were confronting their mortality, confronting the end of their life. And she found that there was a cycle that they went through, well worth reading. And this book, you see a well-used book here, was the basis of our training in the hospice care that I was volunteering in. And once we really understood this process of dying, it was the kind of thing that we were better able to be there for them, just like when we're experiencing change today. There are stages of change. It goes way back to some of my earlier podcasts and the work of William Bridges, the stages of change. And it's in that when we come to realize that we really can then better work our way through change. Well, there's a process to dying, and that was shared in this book. But also, this was a special emphasis in this book, and it's death, the final stage of growth. Growth is not something that's an event. We start that from the day we're born, and all the way through life, we're given the opportunity to choose growth. And as you know, I'm a huge advocate of it. I push and promote that. I've had to apply it myself, going through a difficult past to grow to get beyond a lot of the challenges so I can live a lot much more meaningful and fulfilling life, right? That's what we want. That's the basis very often of a happier and more joyful existence is that we're living life on purpose, with meaning, and with a great sense of accomplishments that we've done and visions for our future, right? But in order to do that, we really want to really, again, emphasize, that this conversation helps to inspire this. And there are these stages that we go through. And so here, when somebody is dying, as we'll cover briefly in hospice care, is what happens. And for those that do that, like all of us volunteers who stayed after and would have these conversations to sort of deal with these mystical kind of experiences very often that we experience, as well as just the profoundness of what we're experiencing. She says, and I love that in her quote here, death is the final stage of this life. There is no total death. Only the body dies. The self or the spirit, or whatever you may wish to label it, is eternal. You may interpret this in any way that makes you comfortable, right? So every religion, everything else has ways to be able to define these elements of it. There's the atheist point of view, which says there isn't any of these aspects of it. But the benefit I had is that confronting mortality pushed me into wanting to be able to understand it. And hence the last podcast of all of the experiences that I had to allow me to begin to understand it. And over time, there was this collective body of knowledge that I gained that really, to me, made this profound awareness that I came to the conclusion, like you see in Elizabeth's quote, that there is meaning to life. There is something post-death. I didn't care to want to try to define it. It's you get into too hard of a conversation with others because everybody has their different viewpoints, and that's good. But the point that it came to, there is, and what a profound effect it had on me as far as wanting now to live my life, right? I'm going to come to that conclusion. It's going to be there. I know there's aspects of it. And again, I shared that last time through the result of all of those experiences. Is what really helped me to come to that conclusion. But that's where some of these resources exist to be able to utilize. Another resource of this is in this next image you'll see here is something I discovered on YouTube. She's probably beyond YouTube on different channels, but that's where I discovered her. And that is Nurse Julie, hospice nurse Julie. She, through her own experience, came to the same conclusion. By being around death, demystifying it, she began to start seeing it from a whole different perspective, right? It's good to be skeptical up front. I'm always skeptical of a new topic. I've got to be able to prove it to myself. And that's was the collective of all those experiences. And the same with Nurse Julie, right? To be able to be in a setting constantly confronted with death. Now she decided, I'm going to start talking about it. And her podcasts are awesome, right? It's talking about, as she says here, and accepting death can help us live. That same thing. That if do we want to live? Do we want to make the most out of life? Right? Then, let's confront some of these things that hold us back. And one of those things is this fear. And if we live in that fear, we're never going to take risks. We're never really going to go forward because I'm so scared of this concept of dying. And I want to avoid this topic at all costs. Well, guess what? We're avoiding life in the same sentence, in the same aspect of this discussion over here. But listen, it's fantastic. She talks about it openly. There's videos that she has with dying people, right? Here's a chance. Okay, maybe it's difficult to go do that in person, but at least maybe doing it with a hands length away of being on a video. But it's the conversations that we're having that is really being able to help understand and demystify this concept of death. Her own experience, like mine, was there's way too many mystical experiences. And I'm going to use that word mystical to say it's unexplained. It seems pretty strange by our standards. But after you experience it enough, you begin to start contemplating it and thinking about things a little bit differently. And as it develops over and over, and you start reading about it and researching it, mostly experiencing it, you start coming to these different conclusions. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about hospice. And this right here is a post, actually, a blog post. I have a WordPress site. I've been posting for years on these topics. And I had a whole series of where I posted about mortality as I was going through this growth phase myself. And I decided that there was a real conclusion that I experienced. Bear with me. And that was that in the dying process, people there have no more runway ahead of them. A runway equals life, right? There's no more life ahead of them except in the minutes or days or weeks, maybe that is left. But it's limited. There's really no more runway ahead of them. Instead, they hold up this rear view mirror and they spend their time reflecting on what they did have, their life. And very often we get the benefit of listening to these conversations as they're reflecting on their life, right? And we do performance appraisals in work. And the whole idea is for our growth in work. Right. And here we are, at the final stage of growth, we're having our life's performance appraisal. But we do that to basically assess what did we do this last year? How do we do to get some other input on this? And then what do we need to do to be able to better at a better performance rate? Because we get benefited by things, better wages, better promotions, better career growth, et cetera. Well, here is our chance to sort of look back and do our performance appraisal on our life. And that's what's happening. And that I experienced over and over and over again. And I came to my own conclusion. I shared this with many other volunteers, and in their own way, they really came to a very similar conclusion. That is that the measures that we use to evaluate our life when we're living it and when confronting the end of our life are very, very different. So the measures that we use to operate our life and judge our life while we're living our life are very different from the measures that we're using to measure our whole life at the end of life. Powerful, profound, are very different. And we're using it. And there's this quote here. It says, at the end of the day, the only questions I will ask myself are, did I love enough? Did I laugh enough? Did I make a difference? I love it. I think that's great. Probably can add your own to that. But in essence, that really characterized so much of what the conversations is. What I found is that for many, it was the regrets that were haunting them. This is the huge benefit of confronting death and being around death is the opportunity to learn the lessons learned from those on the way out. Why not get the benefit of those, as I did, to utilize those to make changes in your life while you're living it? Well, let me talk about some of the lessons I've learned, which are shown here. And again, bear with me as I'm looking at the lessons just to make some commentary on it. I cannot recall one person ever, and I could recite this. They never talked about work. There was no conversation about work. There was no conversation about material possessions or money. Right. And isn't it interesting because the measures that we often have during life, our work, our career, our status, our title, our money, our house, our home, the material possessions that we have, right? He who dies with the most toys wins, right? That's sort of this mentality that we have. But at the end, it's a totally different conclusion. And the realization at that point is they really don't have much importance. Now, let me restate that. The things that we value the most in life are the things that we really realized have very little value. They were simply a means to an end, tools to sort of help us to allow through life. I cannot recall a person ever talking about the material gains and possessions they had during their life. For example, the value of the home was to provide a safe place to raise a family, not about square footage, its resale value, its equity, and other things. Instead, yeah, those can be used during life, but it's a tool. It's not an end all. That's really the power of learning from them what's really important. What was important to most of them? Oh no, let me go step three here. Is his problems they faced during their life were simply bumps in the road. Remember the Native American Indian, that concept of the deathbed perspective? As they look back, these major kind of things that were ordeals in their own life were just simply bumps in the road. They were even large part forgotten by that time. Hey, yeah, that's for life. It has the bumps in the road along the way. I often heard them comment that they worried too much about things that now looking back were only small things. What a powerful thing. I keep that in front of me when I'm going through tough times. I remind myself of that deathbed perspective and realize, you know what? I'm going to get through this. I'm going to get through that. And it takes some of this intense pressure, anxiety, stress, depression that I often felt in these kinds of changes. What was most important to them? It was like we saw in that quote on the previous image I shared. People, not things, not materialism, not titles. It was people that is important. At the end, that's what it's about, the connection we have to people. And instead, where do we spend our time? Focusing on the material possessions, thinking and placing so much importance on these other kind of things, rather than the people that live in the same house as we do, rather than the people that we know or camp out with in our work environments or wherever we may meet. That's the thing that's most important. Did they spend time with those that they loved? Right? That was that expression, right? That was the thing that was the number one regret. I got too distracted based on my life, my role, making this certain money and all these other things there to really spend time with now the people I realized meant the most to me. My family and other people. Think about it today, all the movies and other things where we see is where people have abandoned the ill will that's between family members because people got too distracted by things other than each other, only later on to regret that. And there's a lot of great movies that portray those. The number one regret related to being too distracted with less important matters than with those that they loved and needed them, etc. I cannot tell you how many times they looked at me and they literally, I had a couple of times, they would reach up and with such vigor because of how powerful this meant to them. They would try, don't do what I did. Spend time to smell the roses, to enjoy life, and to spend time with those you love around you. What goal would they have liked to have accomplished? In addition to everything that I just mentioned above, was the desire to leave more footprints in the sand. You know that saying? It's all about leaving a footprints in the sand. That's what they wanted to do. They said, is when you're doing the things in life, use the measure of is it going to be able to benefit myself and others? Is it going to leave footprints in the sand so I may disappear and be away? But the footprints I'll leave, the marks I'll leave, are going to be the things that have helped others. Service to others is no doubt the one aspect of life that you can do that'll have the most and highest and most significant level of purpose and meaning in your life. But yet most of us ignore it. We focus on the ego and ourselves and the material possessions. Hey, I'm not to say don't do that. Right? These things are great, but put in perspective that there's all these people around you who need help. And those who volunteer, you tend to see and feel those who volunteer. They have this better heart, right, in terms of what they do. But as I said, producing more sales, widgets, profit, more money in the bank, more zeros in the bank account had no meaning other than means to an end. Producing more love for others was the lasting measure. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue this conversation about our mortality. And I hope by now I provided you with some ideas and some resources and things to start getting you more comfortable with it. I know it's hard. I know it's difficult. I've been there myself, but now in a different space, right? I no longer fear this aspect of death. In fact, I think it's Marianne Williams said the thing that fear the most is our inability or something to perform. But the thing that what's really the biggest fear is that we live up to our life's potential. And I'm not quoting it exactly, but you can find that quote. It's an impressive quote, but in essence, it says that. The thing that we're most feared about is living a life to the full potential. And that should be our goal. It should be the measure of which we have, because that's how then, when we're at the end of our life, we're going to be measuring against that, instead of the regrets. And believe me, I learned enough from them to say, I don't want those regrets. Until next time, until our next conversation, wish you all the best. Love you all, everybody. And here's to embracing a little bit more about the conversations of death and dying. Love y'all. I'm Michael McGinnis, and you've been listening to You Can Do It, Inspiring Growth, Igniting Potential. Tune in every second and fourth Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Time on Transformation Talk Radio. As a recognized educator, author, and speaker on human potential, let's learn together how to make the most out of this life and to put a ding in your universe. This is the incredible journey of personal and spiritual growth, self-discovery, and enlightenment. For more information, visit growhumanpotential.com.